Well, here we are. Housing has become Australia's biggest economic and social challenge. Everyone agrees that we need more homes. The real question is, why aren't we building them? Very honoured today to be joined by Senator Bragg, who's one of the country's most outspoken, it's fair to say, advocates for housing and productivity reform. So really looking forward to having a discussion around your vision for the future, and obviously the ongoing dialogue that you have with UDIA National in supporting more housing in the future. So thank you and
Oscar,
welcome.
thank you very much.
It's good to see you again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, the elephant in the room, I think we start with the current environment that we're trading within, and you're obviously reviewing and being very vocal with your response to, but the budget, we're in the shadow of that now. I guess there's been time for that to settle in market, and we'd just love for you to make a response to, I guess, the Liberal position on, response to that budget.
Well, I think the political system as we know it is changing in the biggest way it has since the Second World War, and people feel as if the system isn't working for them and they want to break it. And so what you're seeing is mass fragmentation about how people would like to vote, and that's been seen in the opinion polls. The Prime Minister has completely misjudged the moment. He's living in his plasticky world of spin politics, and he's finding that's not working out so well for him. And I think people are hungry for a couple of things. People are hungry for detailed solutions to problems, and people just want to be told what's happening in Australia, why are things going so badly. I think they're smarter than a lot of politicians give them credit for. And so I think you're seeing so much frustration because they're seeing a lot of paternalism. They're being told that a new tax is required on everything to solve a housing crisis, and people are onto it as being a complete falsehood.
And I think that certainly came as a surprise, I guess, the breadth of the change. And, we all put our hand up and say we've got a housing crisis we obviously need to deal with.
Yes.
But I think what we've seen is the instability across a much wider breadth of the economy, which, I think investors take a moment when there's any change. And the worry is that capital doesn't come as quickly at the volume to new housing that we would hope and expect as an industry that's ready to obviously deliver more homes.
Well, it seems to be a strange priority to have a deliberate design feature to suppress supply of any form. And now I understand that the government, if they were sitting here in this chair, would say, well, but we're offsetting the suppressed supply with an infrastructure fund. But why would you have any design of reduced supply for any reason? It just seems bizarre. I mean, the Treasury Secretary, Jenny Wilkinson, has said that the real budget agenda was about effectively redistribution. But that wasn't how it was sold on budget night. So, look, I just think we need to have an economic revolution in Australia where you see every effort put into getting more stuff, more housing, more widgets, more of everything.
Yes.
And we want to see more individuals investing into housing because that creates more houses for others.
Yep.
We want to see more institutions doing that as well. I mean, have historically been critical of certain things like build to rent and foreign investment, perhaps, where it has been given a leg up through laws or tax policies. But I'm not against them actually happening. I just don't think that they necessarily need to have a leg up, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Because the point is we want to see every kind of housing structure assembled in this country right now. We're desperate for it.
Well, you skipped forward a few questions, so we might as well go there now, because I was going to ask around what role super funds and BTR sector has, because certainly I think there's a view that the more of any housing is going to help with the supply crisis. But you've also got, there's definitely some concerns that have been raised around, foreign capital coming in, but, we're a global country, obviously, in the sense of an investment class, and we have seen it difficult for capital to come in with all the right intentions to build houses and be essentially pushed back through not only federal but state taxation policies.
That's right. I'm going there because we're in the midst of the Senate inquiry into the tax bills, and we've heard that there is now a arbitrage in place which promotes institutional investment into housing.
Mm.
And there's been a deliberate design to reduce the amount of individuals. So, like, that's the new world that the government want.
Mm.
We want all kinds of housing on my side. We don't care necessarily who is promoting it or who's going to own it. We won't give it a tax cut. We won't give it a regulatory leg up. But we want to see more housing because we know that more housing is necessary to solve the housing crisis.
Mm.
So I think there's been a lot written and said about our position on BTR. And to be clear, we're in favour of it, but we wouldn't give it a tax cut.
Yep. And so I think, then...
I should probably explain why.
Yeah.
So the reason why is because our first preference is to get individuals to own houses. We don't mind it being part of the overall suite.
Mm.
And I understand that UDIA and other commercial interests want BTR, and that's fine. That's legitimate.
Mm.
But our focus as a party is to help individuals own houses. But if other parts of the housing system want other forms of housing, fine.
Yeah, and I think, certainly from UDIA's perspective, the mum and dad investors has been the engine room of the industry for a long period of time. Really they have been supplying the vast majority of rental housing that's affordable. I've seen that in my professional career. So I think, at this point in time, we've seen that investment framework shift to a point that people are now holding back and waiting, and that's very dangerous when we're already in a situation where we're not building enough houses to what we need. So I certainly think that that's got to be at the core. The mum and dad investor has to be at the core of the decision making to ensure that we're supporting those mum and dads to continue to invest in housing.
Well, I mean, they might now, in a normal environment, have decided to invest more in shares or ETFs or crypto, but I mean, everything gets hit with a 30% tax. So you have to wonder where we're going to be in a year from now if these bills pass, because nothing looks particularly attractive anymore with a 30% minimum.
No. It is problematic potentially, but hopefully we see the dust settle to a point where there is some prioritisation of housing, because where that money flows, I think it's important that it's going to supply at the end of the day, but we should be able to do it wherever it makes sense, not just in the greenfields or just build to rent or built form. It's everywhere, which we totally agree with. I
mean, historically, the view has been that Australia has very high levels of personal and company taxation. Now we have a very high capital tax system as well. So we're a heavily taxed country.
Yes.
I'm not sure what that is going to mean in the long run for housing. I can direct you to the Reserve Bank's investment dwelling forecast, and they go negative in 2027. So that was before the budget. So, I mean, we were already, I would say, not looking great in the medium to long term. And I just think more taxes is going to make a bad situation worse.
If we can shift to one other area you've been, I guess, critical of, but just would like to understand how you see that potentially evolving if you were in the position to make decisions regarding Housing Australia. I think, obviously, I think there is a role for government in ensuring social housing is delivered at a scale that we need. But, just what's your view on how that department's going and the future of it under your guidance?
Look, politicians talking about housing always refer to this nebulous term, social and affordable housing. No one really knows what it means, but it sounds good when politicians give press conferences. Most Australians live in a private house. They don't live in a government house, public house, social house, affordable house. They live in a private house. It's a rental or one that they own with a mortgage in the main. Now, there is an important role for public housing or social housing, and we'll have a policy on that. But we won't be having a great big huge fund in Canberra dishing out money, which is more focused on subsidising the returns of investors rather than getting the best outcome for taxpayers. So if we were going to have a policy on homelessness, which is effectively what you're trying to solve, it would be about helping the states supply the public housing that is needed. Now, I use that term deliberately because there's been a bit of a stink around the use of the term public housing. There should be nothing wrong with that. The idea that you can't use the word public housing has meant we've had to go to this system of social housing where you've got all these other people involved. And I just don't think necessarily this is the cheapest way to do it.
Mm.
Now, I'm sure that you've got members who like the idea of social housing. They're in that space. That's fine. But I think that government should be more open to providing public housing or social housing depending on the scenario. And that's where I would like our policy to go.
Mm. And just you touched on the states, and I think for those listening, I think sometimes there's not a good understanding of the role that the federal government plays versus the states and how the alignment of those two governments, and let's pretend that local government works.
Sure. If you want, in fantasy land.
The alignment of federal and state is obviously, I believe, a really key part of getting this problem sorted out.
Yep.
So wouldn't mind you expand on your thoughts and using maybe enabling infrastructure as an example, how you see that interaction working more seamlessly than what it is currently.
We've announced in the budget reply a $5 billion fund, which would ensure that last mile infrastructure can be provided so that you get housing. Now, the reason this has been announced is because property developers and builders have been asked to subsume the cost of public infrastructure, street lights, footpaths, sewerage, water, whatever. So one of the main reasons that housing is under pressure in Australia is it's hard to make money out of it.
Yeah.
So this would take back the public utility costs where they should be and put them back within government. That should improve the viability of building large-scale housing. And so our fund would be working on the basis that $5 billion, we will get the most housing that we can by virtue of assessing your applications.
Yep.
So if you can build...
Bang for buck.
Yeah, if you can build 1,000 houses with X dollars, then you'll be well and truly assessed with a degree of care and interest. But there'll be a cross-subsidy to the bush, of course. That's reasonable in Australia.
Yep.
But in the main, we'll be looking for big numbers.
And, I think big numbers are required. I think, the $2 billion $2 billion announced in the budget, I think, is welcomed. But,
sure.
There's been some assessments done through our national housing pipeline. We think the number's more like 15 plus to really unlock, this housing problem at scale. So, would there be a scenario where rather than being a one-off budget item, it's something that could be considered as an ongoing commitment? So
you could do it as debt. You could do it as equity. You could do it as a gift.
Interest-free loans or...
Right?
Yep.
It could be a range of things. I mean, I'd be ringing everyone in my phone and saying, I've got this money. I want to get a couple of 100,000 houses out of it. You tell me how many you can give me, and if it's a good number, then you'll get the cash. Yep. I mean, it'll be... Where this scheme would go wrong, and I guarantee this is where it'll go under Labor, is it'll be lost in bureaucracy. I mean, there'll be 1,000 different bureaucrats involved with it. Now, there may be probity reasons why certain conversations shouldn't happen, or there may be a good governance reason why certain transactions shouldn't be taking place. But I'm of the view that for a program like this to work, the minister of the day has to take on some risk and needs to be the decision maker. If the minister doesn't decide where the money is going, with all the appropriate probity and governance checks in place, right, then this fund is a waste of time. And I guarantee under Labor, it'll be a waste of time because it'll take forever to get going. I mean, the Housing Future Fund, by the way, has been going for 2.5 years, has $10 billion and has built 1,000 houses. It's going well.
Certainly from an industry perspective, we feel like we need to be part of that decision-making because at the end of the day, I think our members know where the opportunities exist. And
the developers?
Absolutely.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
Of course they are. And that's why the fund has been designed deliberately that we could partner with a developer. We wouldn't have to partner with a council. In some cases, it might make sense. I mean, you might find a really good progressive council where you can partner with them and say, look, we'll build this if you do that, or a state. But there might be a case where it's a big developer where they've got a lot of land, they can do a lot of good stuff, and partnering with them, let's say, for example, we might be saying we will pay for that piece of water infrastructure is the fastest way to unlock the supply.
Yep. And I've seen a lot of examples where, the local government has fabulous intent. They just don't actually have the funding to bring forward those types of infrastructure.
That's why
they're not being supported.
That's why we can't be boxed in with the process. Otherwise, it'll be all a waste of time. So we've got to be everything that the national government has never been, which is we have to be nimble and we've got to be able to work with the party that is the most likely to get the numbers.
Yep.
You've got to be ruthless on this. And I can see a piece of paper or a spreadsheet and you can see your couple 100,000 houses and you tally it up that way.
Yep.
And that's how you'd have to do it. So I've got a strong conviction that would need to sit inside the Treasury. The housing minister would have to do that piece of work.
Yes.
And just as we have already said about the housing and migration link, the housing minister will do a piece of modelling around that. And so the housing minister under a Liberal government would have to do a lot of hard work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an accountability to that type of money, right? It's, the criteria I think could be quite clear. It's the return on money invested and how many houses and the pace in which they can be brought forward.
That's right. And I mean, this is one of the things that we discovered in the last parliament, that a lot of the government's housing commitments were in the infrastructure portfolio. And so there was a disconnect between the Treasury and the infrastructure portfolio, so that money was promised for housing, but it never got spent or it was never properly managed, so therefore nothing actually happened. And this is very similar to the new homes bonus, which has been cut by a couple of $1 billion because the Commonwealth won't be paying the states to build the houses because they haven't built them. So, I know it's boring, but getting the administration inside the government right before you become a government is essential.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting thinking about your portfolios, having environment and housing. It's actually, I think, quite an interesting position to be, working through both those hand in hand. You want to just give us some insights as to, I guess, the frictions, but the way that those two portfolios need to work together, obviously get the best outcome. We want to ensure that the environment's obviously being protected, but, we've got this crisis on our hands, and how do we get that balance right?
Well, the balance is hard because we want to maintain our amazing natural capital in this country. And so the thrust of our environment policy will be about promoting Australia's natural capital because that's incredibly valuable to us as Australians. But it's also about making sure that the federal government doesn't have a planning control over housing. So I'll be doing everything I can to get out of that space so that we can see large-scale housing approvals. Now, we have at the moment 100,000 houses caught up in the EPBC Act.
Yep.
So if you go back to the Economic Reform Roundtable last year, the Treasurer talked about tens of thousands. Now we're over 100,000. So sure, I don't want to be too political, but the government say that they've cleared 26,000 houses from the backlog, but there's still 100,000 houses in there. So this was never designed to be a federal government planning control. I mean, no one ever thought the federal minister for the environment would be operating like a local government, effectively ticking or crossing whether a housing development could go ahead. So we need to pare the EPBC right back. But I don't want that to be taken as a view that we don't care about Australia's natural capital. We do. We just don't think it should be a restraint on housing.
Yeah, I think from an industry perspective, the certainty around those processes is at the core of it. I think no one's pushing back on the importance of the environmental quality that we're trying to retain. But, like a mum and dad investing in a house, a developer is investing in a project with a set of criteria. And if there's, uncertainty in that process with a time frame, it adds risk and cost and holds back the capital flowing to the right opportunities. So I think, the certainty around a process and ensuring that we can rely upon a time frame and almost fail fast. If it's going to be protected and something needs to be retained, then the development industry can obviously rely on that quickly and transparently and move on. I think that's key.
Look, it's a hard country to do business in, right? Because, you have the Prime Minister of the country promised there'll be no changes to taxes a year ago, and now that's all been changed. In terms of the environmental laws, those have been changed, but not really because it all relies on regulations being made. If you have a political earthquake and something happens
And a fuel crisis.
radically different in the next couple of years, the federal minister for the environment can just remake all the EPBC stuff, the offsets, whatever to do with housing, that just make a regulation, like without the parliament doing anything. So the degree of uncertainty you have is unreasonable. We will effectively do a new EPBC, but it'll be everything in the bill itself. So whatever the parliament enacts is what the law is.
Yep.
What you've got to deal with now is the law that the minister decides on a Tuesday is different to what he decided it was going to be on the Sunday, and he can just make it through his pieces of paper he can execute as a federal minister. I just think it's unreasonable, your level of uncertainty you have to deal with in this sector.
Certainly is at the core of this.
So we want to help you with that. I think we can help you with that. What I can't tell you now is exactly what the definitions would be in the law, but that's something that we're going to consult you on.
And productivity, I think, is at the core of, this discussion. I know, we've got real challenges in our industry around productivity. It's been well documented. Your commentary around the NCC and how that obviously has, kind of built momentum since the 80s as a 200-page document, and now it's over 2,000 pages, I think. And, spending some time on the builder side, I've seen the impacts of these changes where, there's been huge costs added over the last period through changes through the NCC. So just would love to get your view on how can regulation be changed? Like, how bold can we be to ensure that housing can remain affordable, and how hard are you willing to push to ensure that we can achieve that?
Well, I think your industry has the CFMEU and a lot of other kind of baddies that have hurt productivity. And then you've got this cost of regulation, and the national government's contribution to that has been the NCC, which has been a little black box in Canberra that no one's really looked at for a long time outside of the industry. And when we looked at it, we discovered that it's gone from 200 to 2,000 pages, and it assumes that everyone's disabled, everyone wants the most super-duper energy-efficient house, and I just think that's unreasonable. I mean, we should have a system where if you want to build a cheap house, you can. The fact that it's illegal to build a cheap house in Australia, I think, is wrong. And so what we're doing now is looking through the Senate inquiry as to how we can actually strip it back and give you a bare bones house if you want one. I get all the activists and all the whingers are going to cry, rivers and rivers of tears. I really don't care, because we want to have a system where if you just want to have a house, you can build a house. It's up to you. What we're doing is we're doing gold plating, and it's unreasonable. I've had people email me, actually literally pictures of bathrooms they've had to rip up and change, even though they're not disabled, because they've got to have the ramps and the flats, all that stuff, right? What do you call it?
Clearance.
Well, the clearance, right? I mean, some of these are people who are elderly people who haven't got a lot of money. They don't want to be doing these things. I think it's very unreasonable. I think it's unfair. So if you want to have all those other things, you can have them, but they're not mandatory.
Yeah, I think the market ends up deciding, and I think the industry would probably call it affordable housing, not cheap, but we'll take the term. But certainly, I think there needs to be at the federal level an assessment of what are we trying to achieve? What's the impact on affordability, and therefore how many houses can be built under this cost?
Correct. And we want to have things like mobile homes, right? We want to have things like MMC, modern methods of construction.
Yep.
These should all be options that people can have. There's a guy on the Central Coast who builds houses in vans, and he builds a couple of hundred a year. Fantastic, right? They're actually beautiful houses. And he's got some problem with the planning code, and he's been pushed, into all sorts of difficult problems with the New South Wales planning rules and laws. I mean, the country doesn't want people to build houses. And I just think that's one of the biggest problems that we have, is that it's so expensive to do it.
Yeah.
And the gold plating is so bad that it's harder for lower income. I don't care about rich people, right? I mean, rich people, I love all people equally, of course, but I mean, rich people, it doesn't affect them because they can afford to pay the premium. But for a person on a lower income, they are being squeezed out of it. And I just think it's wrong. And the only reason this has happened is because no one has really said to these people at this building codes board, well, hang on, what are you doing in there, guys? So what's going on? Like, who's going to your meetings? where do you get your proposals from? Who's actually reviewing this? And I just think it hasn't had enough scrutiny on it.
And I think productivity, I think we concentrate on what happens above the ground because that's just naturally what's easiest to understand. I actually think the building industry is quite efficient. MMC is only going to make that more efficient. But I think, from a productivity perspective, from what I've seen and what our members are seeing, is it's the planning process and the time you spend 5 years, 10 years before you get that permit and actually start production. That we need really clear leadership from the federal government to ensure that the state and local governments are all aligned with this problem that we've got and we're trying to solve together. So we'd certainly invite any leadership on that. I'd like to look at migration. It's a really interesting problem that we've got where migration obviously brings in, hundreds of thousands of Australians each year. We're not building enough houses and we've got a housing crisis. A proponent of that would be caused by migration. I've heard you mention the position of linking migration to housing. Is there a view that potentially we're not really dealing with the supply problem and almost ensuring that we're limiting migration? Is it as a temporary measure to get the housing right, and then it's like we're on again for a bigger Australia and in keeping the economy going, and obviously we've got an ageing population? Or are you seeing this more as a long-term linkage to supply?
Well, firstly, we have been a great, maybe the best ever migrant nation over these last 250 years. And all you need to do is watch the World Cup.
Absolutely.
And you will realise that we've been so lucky to be such a successful and cohesive migrant nation for 250 years. So we recognise how important migration is to Australia's future going forward. The policy on linking migration and housing is really saying, look, we need to have modelling to see how many houses we need to have in Australia. Maybe you get the National Affordability and Supply Council to do that. I'm not sure. We'll work on that. And then we'd say, well, if we don't get enough houses, then we'd look to cap certain visa classes. But we'd also, as part of this process, make sure that we bring in the skills that we need. And so, for example, we'd bring in more tradies, more builders, because the skill shortages there are acute. So that's the idea. It wouldn't be a hard and fast rule. There need to be ratios. But what it's saying is migration is adding to demand. It does. The Reserve Bank says so. So it's one of the factors. It's not the only reason. I've never subscribed to the view that cutting migration is the only way to solve the housing crisis. It is one of the inputs. The question is to what degree, and what we've said is that we would link migration to housing by modelling how many houses are needed, and if the houses that are needed aren't supplied, then we'd look to restrict certain visa classes.
Now, it seems to make sense as a short-term measure. I think just from an industry perspective, ensuring that we are still getting in those critical skills that we need to build the houses, obviously. So I think ensuring there's a really strong strategy around, supporting that influx of the skills we need. We've got obviously an Olympic village to build and all these screaming resources. So from our perspective, certainly it makes sense as a short-term measure, but really ensuring we're getting the skills we need in is a key part of what our requirements are.
Well, I think people have felt that the increase in migration over the past few years has had an impact. Now, I didn't answer your question properly because I didn't make the point about supply. No, we're not giving up on supply. Supply is the biggest driver of our housing policy. But we also recognise that there is a demand side of the market, and migration has pushed up demand in these last few years, and the norm has been higher than it has been over the last couple of decades in these last few years. And so what's happened in the last, I'm trying not to be too political about this, but what has happened in the last 4 years has been lower levels of completions and higher levels of migration. So we're trying to address
supply and demand,
both things in an even-handed way. And we have said deliberately that we will do the modelling before any other steps are taken.
Yep, makes sense. I'm a boy from Geelong. You're a boy from Shepparton.
Yes.
Just your view on what regional cities play in this housing structure. Have you got any specific ideas on how the federal government in their policy could help regional towns continue to thrive? I think we've seen through COVID, that there's been some life kind of, put back in those towns, but then you've got local councils struggling with infrastructure and in keeping up with the demand that they've seen.
Well, anything that we could do to help Geelong win their 11th premiership would be top of my list, of course.
Excellent.
That is my obsession. But look, I think the regional cities, generally speaking, do benefit from a big government agency or a big government employer being there. So I've always been a believer in decentralisation.
Yep.
Because you have to have these things anyway. And so having them in a regional centre can really help those regions grow with decent jobs.
Yep.
But in general, in a housing context, what we would do is we would have a cross subsidy with our housing fund to ensure that the regions get a fair amount of that $5 billion. And this is something that Matt Canavan talked about in his budget reply that he did in the Senate, actually. So
yep, great. No, fabulous. Certainly, it's a big part, I think, of our opportunity. We've got a lot of land out there.
And what about the 11th premiership?
The 11th premiership, it's down as a commitment that you're going to help support that.
Yeah.
Obviously, Cardinia Park doesn't get enough funding, so there's definitely some opportunities there.
Because if we can't get a new one, maybe we could reclassify the ones from before 1897.
You're correct, yeah.
I've seen that they're actually there at the club. They've got them on display as if they're
just
equals.
claim it.
Well, that's you got to, sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
And I guess doing what you got to do, I think we've all acknowledged that we need bold leadership in housing. So from a reform perspective, is there something that you think would be a bold decision that potentially isn't, political, but the right thing for housing that, you're working on? Or is there like a reform that you're looking to get support with that you think is bold enough to help solve this problem?
Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I think that the level of taxation on housing is obscene.
Yep.
I mean, 50% of the cost of a new house goes in government charges, taxes and fees.
Yep.
I think we've got to find a way to reduce the tax burden as opposed to the Labor Party, which thinks it should increase taxes on housing. So that's one area. And I think there are federal taxes that we could reduce or eliminate in part on housing that would really help. I mean, I'm a big believer in focusing on what you can control.
Yep. I'm
not going to spend my limited time in public office in Canberra crying about the states and territories.
Yep.
It's like complaining about the Swiss Alps. But it's a loser's approach, I think. And then secondly, look, I mean, my view is, and I stress this is not my party's policy, but the superannuation system, I think, has not been good for home ownership. I think now, particularly when you look at the tax arbitrage available to super funds, they're going to be better placed to buy houses than people in many cases. And so I think we need to continue to consider whether or not there are opportunities for people to use their own money to access their little piece of Australia.
Yeah. It's a fundamental part of being Australian. We can't let that slip.
That's right.
And I think, there's this intergenerational, kind of trust that's being eroded at the moment where, it causes all sorts of social impacts potentially if that dream of home ownership is too hard. And
that's right.
That's what we're dealing with.
That's right. And I think if you imagine you're a 25-year-old or something and you've got a HECS debt or something, or you've got a TAFE debt, and you've got to put 12% of your money into a super fund for 40 years. I mean, it's a lot of money, and maybe that's not the best approach. It feels to me as a very illiberal approach, a very paternalistic approach. And I just think that younger people are smarter. They'll listen to a 1-hour podcast. They'll listen to a longer podcast potentially. They're hungry for information.
Are you time checking me?
I'm not time checking you, but and they've got access to all sorts of information through artificial intelligence. So,
Absolutely.
Look, I just think the idea that, because effectively the superannuation thing came out of a world where everyone worked, 9 to 5, you worked for 40 years, so it sort of maybe it made sense for working people to do that. Now people work so differently. They have so much more information.
Mm.
It's a very heavy-handed approach. And when you look at the long run, what's the outworking of the scheme? Most people are still on the pension. It costs the government a lot, and maybe people would be better off being able to choose what they wanted to do with their own money. Now, the government solution is, of course, lock everything up in superannuation. It helps them, helps the Labor Party, whatever else. And then they have the 5% deposit thing as their main flagship demand side policy. And I just think we could do better than that.
Fascinated to hear. So, Senator, thank you so much.
Thanks, Oscar.
I think your engagement with UDIA and other peak bodies has been very genuine, and I think we really welcome the ongoing discussion. And I think it's a real debate at the moment as to what the answer is, and I don't think it's an easy one. It's a complex supply and demand environment that we're working within, but I think ensuring that there's some solid voices in the opposition is really important, and we look forward to continue working with you collaboratively and trying to solve this problem together.
Thanks, mate. And to all the UDIA's members,
Go Cats.
You do a great job.
Thank you, mate.
Okay, thanks, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ciao.